Understanding the Hidden Worlds of Teenagers, Episode 6. Today, we're looking at the voices that shape your teenager. There was a father who asked a question that stayed with me long after a conversation ended. He wasn't angry. He wasn't blaming anyone. If anything, he sounded more puzzled than upset. He looked at me and said, "I know my son still loves us, so why does it feel like my opinion matters less than everyone else's now?" For a moment, neither of us spoke. But beneath that question was something many parents quietly carry. Not fear of losing control, not disappointment, but the painful feeling that somewhere along the journey into adolescence, the child who once wanted your opinion about everything now seems more interested in someone else's opinion. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe your teenager comes home excited about an idea. You smile because it's something you've been encouraging for years, only to discover they didn't believe it when you said it. They believed it because a friend mentioned it, or a teacher, or a coach, or someone they follow online. At first, that can hurt. You may even wonder, have I stopped being important? But before we answer that question, we need to understand something remarkable about adolescence. Something that changes the way we interpret this moment. Growing up isn't simply about becoming taller or older or more independent. It's also about slowly discovering how to think for yourself. And that journey almost always involves listening to voices beyond your family. Not because home has failed, but because life is becoming bigger. The world that once revolved around parents now begin expanding. School introduces new personalities. Friendships become deeper. Teachers begin speaking into areas parents may never have explored. Books introduce unfamiliar ideas. Music carries messages. Films shape imaginations. Social media quietly enters conversation long after everyone else has gone to bed. Without realizing it, a teenager begins collecting pieces of world around them through these channels. Some pieces strengthen them, others confuse them, some inspire courage, others plant unnecessary fear. Influence rarely announces itself. It usually arrives quietly, through one conversation, one comment, one opinion, one video, one friendship, one sentence that refuses to leave a young person's mind. That's why influence is so fascinating. Most of the time, we only notice its result, not the process. A teenager suddenly loses interest in something they once loved. A new dream appears almost overnight. Different language begins seeping into everyday conversations. Attitudes slowly change. Confidence grows or quietly disappears. Parents often ask, "What happened?" The better question may be, what has been shaping their thinking while life has been moving forward? This is because every young person is becoming someone, and no one becomes that person alone. Perhaps this is a good place to pause for just a moment. If you are a parent listening today, I want to invite you to try something different this week. The next time your teenager talks excitedly about a person they admire, don't rush to decide whether you approve. Just become curious at first. Become curious and ask, what do you admire about them? Then simply listen. You may discover that what attracts a teenager isn't the person's popularity. It might be their confidence. It might even be their kindness. It might be their creativity or their courage. When they understand what a young person is drawn to, when you as a parent or adult understand what a young person is drawn to, you begin understanding what they are searching for within themselves. And that changes the entire conversation. One of the greatest misconceptions about adolescents is believing that influence is automatically dangerous. It isn't. In fact, none of us would be the people we are today without influence. Think about your own life. Someone probably encouraged you when you doubted yourself. Someone taught you something that changed the way you think. Someone believed in you before you fully believed in yourself. Influence can become one of life's greatest gifts. The question isn't whether teenagers will be influenced. They will definitely be. The real question should be, who is earning the privilege of shaping the way they see themselves and the world around them? That question is worth asking. Not because we want to control every relationship, but because every meaningful relationship leaves something behind. Some leave wisdom, some leave confidence, some leave compassion, others leave insecurity or fear, or habits that quietly become part of a young person's daily life. And here is something I've learned after listening to many families over the years. Teenagers are often less influenced by the people who speak the loudest and more influenced by the people who make them feel understood. That thought changes everything, because influence doesn't begin with information. It actually begins with connection. There's another part of this conversation that many adults find difficult to accept at first. Not because it's unpleasant, but because it feels personal. As children grow into adolescence, they don't stop needing their parents. What changes is the way they learn. When children are younger, they naturally look to adults for most of their answers. Parents become the center of their little world. If mom says it's true, it must be true. If dad says it's dangerous, it must be dangerous. That trust is beautiful, but it isn't meant to remain exactly the same forever. As teenagers grow, something remarkable begins to happen. Instead of simply receiving ideas, they begin testing them. They compare what they've always known with what they are discovering. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they question. Sometimes they return with new perspectives that sound unfamiliar to everyone at home. That can feel unsettling, especially when you've spent years pouring your heart into raising them. But questioning isn't always rebellion. Very often is development. It's the mind learning not only what to think, but how to think. That doesn't mean every new idea is wise, far from it. It simply means that curiosity has become part of their growth. And curiosity should never frighten us as parents. It should invite us into conversation. I remember speaking with a mother who said, "Every discussion with my daughter now feels like an argument." So I asked her, "When Was the last time you had a conversation where neither of you was trying to win? She became quiet. Not because she had done something wrong, but because she had realized that almost every recent conversation had become a debate. One person trying to convince, the other trying to defend. No one trying to understand. That happens more often than we realize. When teenagers begin thinking differently, adults sometimes feel responsible for correcting every opinion immediately. The intention is usually love. The outcome is often distance, because once every conversation becomes a correction, a teenager slowly learns something. If I tell them what I'm feeling or I'm really thinking, I'll probably be corrected before I'm understood. So, they begin sharing less. Not because they no longer care about the relationship, but because protecting their thoughts feels easier than defending them. Perhaps this week, try something that feels almost too simple. The next time your teenager shares an opinion you disagree with, don't begin with, "Oh, that's wrong," or "Who told you that?" Instead, take a gentle breath and ask, "Help me understand how you arrived at that conclusion." Do you notice the difference? One response closes a door, the other opens one. You may still disagree by the end of the conversation, but you've just shown your teenagers something incredibly invaluable: that different opinions don't have to destroy relationships. Influence grows wherever people feel heard. That's true for adults, and it's certainly true for teenagers. Think about your own life for a moment. Whose advice do you value most? Is it simply the person with the loudest voice? Probably not. More often, it's someone who first made you feel understood, someone who listened before speaking, someone who didn't rush to judge your questions. Teenagers are no different. The person who shaped them most deeply are often those who make them feel that their thoughts matter. That's why influence isn't really a competition between parents and friends. It's much more complex than that. Different people meet different emotional needs. A coach may awaken confidence in adolescents. A teacher may inspire curiosity in adolescents. A grandparent may offer wisdom. A faithful friend may remind a teenager they are not alone during a difficult season. A mentor may notice gifts that even teenager hasn't yet discovered. When those influences are healthy, they don't replace the family's role, they strengthen it. In many ways, raising a teenager is less about being the only voice they hear, and more about helping them recognize which voices deserve to be trusted. That is a lifelong skill, because adulthood doesn't remove the need for influence. It simply changes where we find it. Even today, the books we read, the conversation we have, the people we admire, the content we consume, all continue shaping the way we see ourselves and the world around us. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts we can give a young person isn't teaching them to reject every outside influence. It's teaching them how to recognize the difference between influence that builds character and influence that quietly erodes it. This brings us to a question every caring adult should ask from time to time. Not who are my teenagers' friends, but who qualifies or what qualities are becoming more visible in my teenager's life? Because healthy influence leaves footprint. You begin to notice greater kindness, more honesty if you do this. You begin to notice growing responsibility, compassion, humility, courage to do what is right even when it's difficult. Unhealthy influence leaves footprints too, not always dramatic ones. Sometimes they are almost invisible at first. Respect slowly fades. Integrity becomes negotiable. Unkind words become normal. Shortcuts become acceptable. The change is rarely sudden. It's usually quiet, which is why paying attention matters so much. Not with suspicion, but with loving awareness. Because when we notice small changes early, we create opportunities for meaningful conversation long before small concerns become painful crises. Perhaps the most reassuring thing I can say to every parent listening today is this: you do not have to compete with every influence in your teenager's life. In fact, you never could. The world they are growing up in is much larger than the one many of you experienced or many of us experienced. Every day they hear ideas from classmates, teachers, coaches, musicians, authors, online creators, films, podcasts, and countless conversations that happen when we're not around as parents. Trying to silence every outside voice isn't realistic, and it is not even necessary. The goal isn't to become the only influence in your child's life. The goal is to remain a trusted one. That's the difference. A trusted voice doesn't need to speak the loudest. It simply needs to be the voice a teenager still wants to return to when life becomes confusing. And that kind of influence is really built during life's biggest moment. It's built during ordinary Tuesdays, ordinary time, during school runs, while washing dishes together, driving to football practice, preparing dinner, walking home from church, laughing over something that wasn't even important. Those ordinary moments become emotional deposits. One conversation at a time, one shared memory at a time, one moment of feeling understood at a time. Many parents underestimate the power of those everyday interactions because they don't look dramatic. But relationships are rarely strengthened by dramatic moments alone. They are strengthened by consistency. A teenager may not remember every piece of advice you gave, but they'll often remember how they felt in your presence. Did they feel respected? Did they feel safe enough to ask difficult questions? Did they believe they could disappoint you without losing your love? Those memories quietly shape whether they return to you when life becomes complicated. There's something else I've learned over the years. Teenagers don't always need parents who have every answer. They need parents who are willing to keep learning alongside them. There's a quiet strength in saying, "That's an interesting question. I've never thought about it that way." Or, "Let's learn about that together." You see those words don't weaken your influence. They strengthen your credibility because they teach something far more valuable than certainty. They teach humility, and humility builds trust. If you're listening today as a teacher, never underestimate the sentence you speak to a student who seems ordinary to everyone else. You may become the reason they begin believing in themselves. If you are a coach, Remember that the lessons you teach about discipline, respect, and perseverance may outlast every trophy your team ever wins. If you're a mentor, a conversation that lasts 15 minutes could shape decisions someone carries for 15 years. If you are a youth worker or church leader, never assume young people are only listening during organized programs. Often they remember the quiet conversations after everyone else has gone home. Influence doesn't always arrive through formal teaching. Sometimes it arrives through consistent character. People watch how we live long before they remember what we say. And if you are a teenager listening to this episode, I want to speak directly to you for just a moment. The people you spend the most time listening to will slowly shape the person you're becoming. Not all at once, not in obvious ways, but little by little, their attitude can become your attitudes. Their habits can become your habits. Their views of the world can quietly become your own. So, I encourage you to choose carefully whose words you allow to settle in your heart. Spend time with people who challenge you to become kinder, wiser, more honest, more compassionate, more responsible, not simply more popular. The people who truly care about you won't ask you to become someone else in order to earn their acceptance. They will encourage you to grow into the best version of who you already are. Before we finish today, I'd like to leave you with one simple reflection. Imagine dropping a tiny pebble into a still lake. The pebble is small. The ripples seem almost invisible at first. But they keep traveling long after the pebble has disappeared beneath the surface. Influence works much the same way. A conversation, a kind word, a thoughtful correction, and an encouraging teacher, even a patient parent, a faithful friend, a trustworthy mentor. None of those moments may seem extraordinary on the day they happen. Yet years later, a young adult may still remember them, still be living by them, still drawing strength from them. I encourage you all to never ever underestimate the quiet power of your presence in a young person's life. You may never fully know which conversation becomes the one they remember when they need courage, or hope, or wisdom. And perhaps that's the beautiful responsibility we all share. Not to control another person's journey, but to become the kind of influence that helps them walk it with confidence, compassion, and character. Thank you for spending this time with me today. In our next episode, we'll explore another important part of adolescence. We'll look beyond the behavior once again and discover why communication between teenagers and adults sometimes becomes so difficult, even when both sides genuinely want to be by each other or love each other. Because sometimes the greatest problem isn't a lack of love or affection, it's a lack of understanding. Until then, keep listening, keep asking thoughtful questions, keep noticing the quiet moments that others overlook, because every young person deserves at least one adult who helps them feel seen, heard, and valued as they grow. And never forget, helping a teenager flourish isn't about having perfect words. It's about being a consistent person in a world filled with competing voices. Thank you for joining me. Take good care of yourself and of the young people whose lives you have the privilege to influence. Bye for now.